we're a little inconsistent with the rule, but in general, what he's saying is absolutely true. So I just caution you before you bring one back, make sure you read the details of the rule.
I mean, it's not rocket science to cape out ahead. It's not a big deal.
Any comments from the public? Mike?
Tennessee Wildlife Federation. I just wanted to make the commission aware with a little more detail of what Chuck was alluding to. We hosted a summit, a national summit held in February with about, I think it was around 16 different organizations, including national organizations like the National Wildlife Federation, the Quality Deer Management Association. For those of y'all that don't know, the National Wildlife Federation has affiliate organizations like ours in all 50 states across the union. And they're the largest member organization in the United States for conservation and wildlife. They have about 8 million people in their organization. They're huge. And I've worked for the last 5 years to bring them into this fight because they bring the grassroots muscle that can actually change it. And the complicating factor on this disease is it's slow acting, so people get real comfortable kind of working with it until it hits, and then all hell breaks loose, so to speak. So the idea is, there are a few things you can do at a federal level, but not many. The USDA APHIS rules were recently changed about 4 years ago, and they are actually problematic. They allow for live transport of infected animals right now under certain circumstances. So we're taking an approach, and I'm going to email to each of you the 12-month strategy that we produced. It has 7 objectives. And you can see where this group of people that are dealing with this on a regular basis are focused in our efforts. I can tell you that the recent peer-reviewed research out of Wyoming showed annual 10% decline in whitetail deer in CWD endemic areas, and the peer-reviewed research out of Iowa County, Wisconsin, the sampling rate for CWD, and hold on to your seats, 50%. The statement made by their department is you'll have CWD or you'll have deer hunting. You won't have both. So half of that population in that county that was sampled is guaranteed dead. No questions, ifs, ands, or buts. And that's the difficult thing about the prion, is that it has no RNA or DNA. You have to incinerate it at 1,200 degrees to take it apart, or denature it with 100% bleach. Dr. Cook's right. If we get it, it'll never go away. And so we've been working on this issue for a long time. And I would point you to one resource today, and then I'll get out of here. Go to www.cwd-alliance.org. This is a program, cwd-alliance.org. That is a program of the Wildlife Management Institute run by a colleague of mine named Matt Dunphy. That is the clearinghouse for the best information. The Dr. John Fishers and the Dr. Millers from Colorado State, that's where all this stuff gets amassed. And the director's correct. Dr. Fisher is one of the leading experts in the country. He and Dr. Miller are probably the top 2. So we're fortunate to have him. He likes to come to Nashville to listen to music, so maybe we can get him back up here. He did play a very important role this year in working through the challenges around a piece of legislation. We had him testify, give a presentation before the Legislative Sportsman's Caucus, which was very effective, and it got everybody's attention. So I'll be around if anybody has any questions, but that's a great site to go to, and you can get up to speed on the latest information.
Thank you, Mike. Any other comments from the Director Carter?
One final one. The Southeast Wildlife Disease Cooperative is funded through the United States Geological Survey. Their funding was cut 3 years ago, and the Southeast states were asked to make up the difference in funding to keep that going forward. One of Dr. Fisher's reports Saturday was that they have been further reduced going into this upcoming fiscal year on the federal side. So I don't know what that means in terms of extra money that we'll all have to kick in, or if there'll be funding from some other source, but anyway, their budget is being decreased.
Thank you, Director Carter. Well, thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it. Do you want to now go into the whitetail deer resolution?
If that's your wish.
Let's do it.
All right. Hopefully you guys aren't wore out on me already. Speaking of getting wore out, I was on an empty stomach right before I came up here, and Frank kindly threw me a granola bar out of his coat. Thank you, Frank. And I'm waiting on Joy to bring me a water, so maybe I'll be all right. So in regards to the Tennessee Wildlife Federation's resolution regarding whitetail deer strategic planning by the agency, I'd like to thank the Federation for their interest in this subject and their offer to support us in this initiative. A couple of things that I'll share to begin is that what we're talking about here is an independent document or process from the overall agency strategic planning or plan. We have a strategic plan, and for the agency, and I had an example to show you, but I think I've left it behind. But anyway, so this would be a separate effort from that, and I wanted to acknowledge that we've already been working towards the development of a new deer strategic plan, and that this is a subject that we're interested in and passionate about. Even though the Federation also shares in that interest. I'd like to share for you what the vision of the deer program should be, a science-based and data-driven adaptive management framework for TWA and the Commission. And I emphasize TWA and the Commission, and I emphasize that it should be adaptive, but it should be a usable plan that comprehensively informs TWRA and the Commission on decision-making and activities regarding deer, and should consider funding, the expectations of hunters and stakeholders, and the political landscape and the exigencies of TWRA operations. And when I say political, I don't mean Republican and Democrats. I mean that there's competing interest in this program, and a lot of interest. So it would be foolish to ignore that component. But considering those different elements, neither the Commission nor the agency has a full grasp of all those. So it's important that we involve both parties. We desire for it to be we desire for it to be an inclusive approach, and that important stakeholders would have a voice in the process. We're currently more firmly establishing a planning team to lead this undertaking, and ultimately this effort will result in a written plan to be referenced for your decision making and ours. Another key piece to this is involvement of senior leadership, including the TWA executives and the Commission, because absent their vision and commitment, others are likely to not take it seriously. So that'll be a key part of this. The components that should be achieved is first a performance assessment, and I like to call this the current state of affairs, and it's a comprehensive look in the mirror to see where we are, what's our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges. And then to firm up the vision and develop a value statement identifying the principles on which the program will be built, and then identifying goals and objectives on what we want to accomplish. And those key pieces there, the vision, the value statement, the goals and objectives, I think those are the key components where stakeholders, including wildlife partners, are key in helping us accomplish those. And then also identifying strategies and tactics which are specific to the set of activities or best practices that we'll use to accomplish this. And finally, an implementation plan, which is, you could think of it as a user's guide to the strategic plan, which describes our specific priorities and how we plan to pursue them in a logical and feasible fashion. Some pitfalls that we need to be careful that we don't fall victim to is a lack of objectivity and discipline. This is a big undertaking, and will take a lot of discipline to accomplish, and we have to avoid rushing it. This will take quite some time. In fact, I believe that if we're gonna do it right, it's gonna take a full 2 years to do, because it'll result in major changes that require extensive buy-in internally and externally, because it will likely lead to significant change, and when in times of change, you'll need that buy-in. However, by saying that it should, in its entirety, would take 2 years, that's not saying that you wouldn't see any fruits of this effort before then. Is that as the process goes on, you'll see those results. It's just a final buttoned-up plan. Could require that much time if we're going to do it right. With that, I entertain any questions.
Well, thanks, Chuck. You know, I know it was just a month ago that we talked about this, so this feels like a good place to start. It's a mission statement, basically. We haven't really said much. So the meat of this is, you know, what are the goals? What are the strategies to achieve the goals? And what metrics are we going to use to see how we're doing on our goals? So is there any discussion of those specifics? Have you gotten anywhere with those kind of specifics?
I would say we're not that far along. Some things that we have done specifically in this regard is we've hired some new staff members that have experience doing this. I guess we've got quite a bit of staff that have experience doing this. However, what we're talking about here is a little bit different undertaking than what we've done in the past. And so we've, in selecting new employees, have looked for that experience in hopes that we could bring some of that here. And we've been successful in doing that in the deer program and the elk program. And so hiring those candidates should go a long ways in helping us get there. Another thing is that, and I'll speak specific to James as the deer program leader, since he's not here, and you know he has to rely on what I have to say. But he's focused a lot of effort on further educating himself on the process, and then determining what his exact recommendation would be to his peers, and then eventually the commission on how we move forward. Another thing that we've planned for May is that we've invited Dr. Dan Decker from Cornell to come. He's an expert in project or program management systems. He's going to come in May and educate staff on systems thinking and planning, which has a whole lot to do with what we're talking about here. And I believe this will be a great boost in how we move forward in strategic planning. And then getting our, in this case, deer team focused on this issue and being sure that they're inclusive in their planning development.
Thanks. And you know, this is such a big undertaking. Do you have, say, do you have any partners you can incorporate in this, and stakeholders, for example? Who do you see as being that?
Well, there's a lot of good options there. The ones that rise to the surface as far as helping us see what the interests are of hunters, at least from a collective standpoint, would be the Federation, obviously. We've got university experts that could certainly contribute on the in regards to deer research. So I see a strong university component. I see a strong component from the Federation, and I'm sure there's some interest groups specific to deer that could provide some valuable insight. My ideas for engaging them and including them, that we've got options, and these are purely options at this point, but is to involve them through a committee that interacts regularly with the TWA planning team, and they could interact and keep that team informed as they move forward in their planning. Another option is doing attitude and opinion surveys of stakeholders, in this case, the partner membership. And then lastly, scoping meetings where we invite the public to come and learn about their interest in these programs. And I think those are the best options for us to involve stakeholders.
Thank you. Sounds like a good start. I would hope it would be quicker than 2 years, but we'll do the best we can. So any other comments from the committee? Chairman Holbert, Commissioner Holbert?
Chuck, how long do you expect it to take to put a team in place? That, it seems to me like those people, you would know who those need to be right now. That doesn't, I mean, explain to me why that would be a long process, I guess.
Well, we had a team focused earlier, and the majority of their efforts you saw through the tagging discussions of the past, and where we're debating or deliberating, I should say, debating's the wrong word, but is this is very different. That requires some different skill sets. So we're trying to decide, do we restructure a team and take that route, or do we just carry on as we are? So we're actively in that conversation, and very soon should have an outcome.
Thanks. I just, we have these professionals hired. We have an elk coordinator. We have a deer coordinator. I just want to be able to, I want to see them be able to do their job, and I guess I just want to stress that to the agency. We need them allowed to do their job, and I don't want to see them bound or, why do we have them if we're not going to use them? So I just want to make that clear that, our deer coordinator, if we have trust in him, we hired him, we need to let him be a big part of this strategic plan. That's all I've got to say.
I think that's an excellent point. Agree totally.
Well,
Chairman,
but I don't want to overlook the participatory, sorry, this is a tough word for a boy from Statesville. But a participatory undertaking is, when we're talking about something this significant, we'll need a lot of interaction with staff. So I agree that those individuals are a key part of this, but it's definitely an overall agency initiative, and we'll make sure that that's how we carry it out.
Chairman Woodson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chuck, thank you for the presentation and for everyone who's contributed to thinking about it. As I'll give a confession. 2 years feels really long. That is my individual feedback. I know what strategic planning processes do. There's also systems change, so I want to recognize that, the internal and external collaboration that has to happen, the alignment, the not just buy-in, but the ownership. I totally get that. 2 years feels like a very long time to develop, not implement, but develop a strategic plan. So that is feedback for you and the team. I think secondly, and everybody has different learning and work styles, but because this is setting the strategic vision, I really do think that this is an appropriate commission level understanding. Everybody has different learning styles. There's things, if you've ever heard of a Gantt chart, if you haven't, don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal, but it's basically the process and timeline. What are our goals? We're going to do everything you just outlined, but then you see over a period of time, what's going to get done, when's it going to get done, and it actually takes time just to get that chart of time on where different things are going to happen. If your deadline for this strategic plan is whatever date out in the future, hopefully less than 2 years, but we'll see what y'all come up with. And working back, all the things that have to happen, I know that in and of itself takes time, and that's more than 30 days from our last conversation. But whether it's a Gantt chart or something, I'd love to understand what this high-level plan with these vision and goals look like, and what the meat of it looks like to deliver something at a time that will ultimately be a collaborative thing. If that's a reasonable request, I'd like to be able to see the future and see when those moments, at least on the front end, and sometimes you do something quicker than it might happen, sometimes you do it slower, but I'd like to at least see on the strategic plan kind of the start to finish on the process, and that may take a little bit of time to get together, but is that a reasonable request?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? From the public? I propose we take a quick break, get some sugar.
I think that's a wonderful idea. Just a quick update, and for those of you who are noticing, it's 12:40 and we have quite a bit of work to do. Chris Richardson just really helped me out and was kind enough. Say again? Yeah, good. So we're gonna have some pizzas delivered into the break room. We're gonna keep moving forward with our work. And so as you need to tend to your business, please do so. But we'll take a yeah. Well, if it's okay, I'd like for, however long of a break you think you need for the committee, because you've still got other items. Whatever, I defer to you, Chairman. That okay to keep moving? And Chris, do you have a sense of when they'll be here? So they're in about 30 minutes. Do you all want to keep moving forward? And if you need to tend to anything right now, do it? Is that,
Yes.
gentlemen and ladies? Is that okay? We'll keep moving forward in about 30 minutes. Got a few pizzas and,
Great.
is that all right? Okay. Excellent.
As I said, let's not take a break. And so like to.
For the record, that was his idea, not mine.
Yeah, right. I'd like to recognize Brad Miller, the elk coordinator. Or elk program leader, I should say.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So it's me before the pizzas, right? So this may be a recap for many of you, but for the newer commissioners, this is going to be just a brief, hopefully, PowerPoint talking about the history of the elk program, and then touch on a little bit about current management on the public land that the elk reside on, the North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area. I also want to touch on population monitoring, which is a component of our elk management program, touch on the hunting program, and as well as habitat management. So we used to have lots of elk in the eastern U.S., probably millions. However, in the mid-1800s, most of those were extirpated. But you can see how far down into the south that elk went historically, nearly down to the Gulf coastal plain. However, nowadays, the range is greatly restricted. There's been restoration efforts in several states. Probably the most, probably the most recent being West Virginia. They just released some elk. Missouri was, 3 or 4 years ago, so they've got a little over 100 elk now. North Carolina is at 150. But you can see that, kind of the big player is Kentucky, and they reintroduced a year or two before TWRA did. But when they brought elk, they really brought elk. They brought thousands in. Our elk restoration program couldn't have happened without the partnerships and with the efforts of many others, Parks Canada, RMEF, UT, Cora, and on and on. And the goals were basically restoring elk to a portion of their former range in Tennessee. There's only certain places in Tennessee that are compatible with elk. You don't want to release them in Davidson County. You probably don't want to release them in areas where you have a lot of agriculture and you're going to have conflicts. So a site was selected on the Cumberland Plateau with the goals of having a self-sustaining elk herd that we could view, we could hunt, and just all in all use. But again, when you restore animals and you reintroduce animals, you're not bringing a single animal, you're bringing an ecosystem, right? So you're bringing a large organism and all its bacteria, virus, fungi, and everything else along the lines of what Chuck was talking about. So we had to be very mindful of harmful diseases, concerns with cattle, et cetera. So it was a large effort, and the area that was defined is a 670,000 acre zone in 5 counties: Morgan County, Campbell County, Claiborne County, Anderson County, and Scott County. And not much, a fairly significant portion of that is public land.
I didn't quite get that.
Fairly significant portion is. The,
I didn't quite get that.
the designated restoration zone is 670,000 acres. Yeah, it's pretty big. So, here's a map, and I don't know if you all can see it on your iPads in front of you or anything, but, it goes over to Oneida, Huntsville, down to Wartburg, over to Oliver Springs, around to Lake City, Jacksboro, and then runs up Powell Valley through La Follette up towards Middlesboro, Kentucky, using fairly relatively well-defined landmarks, roads, and things. So when elk were reintroduced in 2000, it was a great spectacle. I mean, hundreds of people came out to see these, trailers open that had traveled for a couple of days from Canada and watch these elk run across a snowy pasture, or snowy field. I mean, I wish I'd have been there to see that, but, all accounts, it was great. And over time, we have released slightly over 200 elk. Initial release in 2000, most recently in March of '08. But the origin of essentially all of these animals is Elk Island National Park in Alberta. Some elk did come from land between the lakes, but those elk also originally came from Elk Island. So generally it's all the same source. As part of our management program, we try to monitor populations to look at, movements, look at survival, et cetera. And to do that historically, the University of Tennessee, the first 2 or 3 years of the restoration, did a great job flying nearly weekly to look for dead animals, to monitor expansions and movements. Nowadays, we're moving more towards using technology, GPS transmitters, so that we're able to follow these animals a little bit more closely. You can get up to 2 or 3 locations per day, and the map on the right is just an example of GPS collar data on a cow. As part of that monitoring, we have ramped up in recent years the number of active collars, and the reason is, number one, when you do have animals out there with transmitters, you're able to find out where they go, but you're also able to use those as marked animals, and it's all part of population monitoring and estimating populations. So the more animals in a population that you have marked, the better your data is, essentially. So over time, there's been an increase, and in this winter, we've added 8 additional GPS collars to that number reported there of 24 active collars. A couple of traditional collars have come off, but essentially we're at about 30 collars out there right now. And as I mentioned, the more animals you have collared, the larger the percentage of the population you have collared, the better your data is, the less confidence interval width you have. And we use those marked animals when we do surveys in the winter to estimate population size. And all that data gets plugged into a computer program, and it spits out a number with confidence intervals around it. And over time, look at the trend line, it's steadily growing. The most recent estimate's about 349, but again, it bounces around. There's a lot of noise in that data, but over time, we hope to minimize some of that. And I've been working with researchers at the University of Tennessee to figure out some ways where we can improve things. Hunting. So, again, initially, the hunting program was quite the spectacle. I mean, there was tent camps and horses, and, you know, it was almost like an out west hunt. And it began in '09 with the issuance of 5 bull tags. 4 of those random draw, 1 was auctioned off by Tennessee Wildlife Resources Foundation. And all 5 hunters were successful and took some pretty good bulls. So that was in '09, first year. 2016, we had 3 hunts. We had our traditional 5-day firearm hunt with 5 hunters. We also added the archery hunt, so that was new for 2016. That was 5 hunters out there. And again, we have that weekend youth hunt. We weren't as successful this fall. We had a lot of issues with hot weather and drought and things, but I anticipate that 2017 is going to be a whole lot better. And over time, we have had 5 zones where we would put 1 hunter per zone, and we have, starting in 2015, added a couple additional zones and rested some of our original zones. And this fall in 2017, we're going to, you know, do a little moving around again. But, you know, since hunting has started, we've taken 34 elk, 34 bulls. And many of them, you know, pretty big, some, you know, 6x6s and 7x6s, good sized bulls. So as far as habitat management on North Cumberland, really we have 3 main tools in our toolbox. We have the use of prescribed fire, we have managing wildlife openings, and we have timber harvest. Prescribed fire, you know, sometimes it's too wet, sometimes it's too dry. You often have, you know, really narrow windows where you can get out and do prescribed fire on the landscape safely. So it's a tool that we use as much as we can. And I'll talk in a minute about specific projects, but when we have additional grant funds come in, we're able to hire contractors and get them out there burning one site while agency staff may be somewhere else on the same day, you know, burning a different site. Managing wildlife openings, you know, it's pretty rugged terrain. We're a little different than what you may have seen or heard in Kentucky, where they have mountaintop removal and they have big, huge flats and just rolling, you know, grassy fields. We're limited to a lot of ridge tops where we have flats, so it's a lot of narrow strips of openings. We have about 750 acres currently of wildlife openings. We plant about 200 acres of those each year, and they're kind of mowed or managed every couple of years. And timber harvest, you know, we have our own foresters on the area that do timber harvest, as well as we have, and John Mike may be able to touch on this a little better, but there are contracts with like Lime Timber and other entities that still have timber rights on some of our property, and they're actively harvesting timber.